what you call preventive maintenance here. Getting all this prep, all this loose flaky paint needs to all be pulled off, and this all needs to be epoxied and repaired properly here.
Looking, Dave.
Actually, it's a full sash with a screen for up here. So I want to get some measurements, and we're gonna build new storms and replace these screens with 30 is 3/8. By 30 and 5/8. So 30 and 5/8 wide by 57 3/4 high. We need to write that. In a lot better shape. It still needs to have, this is all rot right here, so we'll just replace the whole rail like the other one. Pull this hinge off here. Well, these are just, they're treated. You can see the corrosion is already starting, so you need to use a stainless steel.
There you go. There's what's left. Original.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dave King with Eco Woodworks, and I'm going to be filming a short video of how to reglaze a wood sash window. And during the course of that time, I'll show some techniques, I'll review and show some of the tools that are needed and supplies needed. Okay, this is the Bigelow House Museum storm window, and we're in the process of removing the glazing putty and salvaging the glass if we can, and then we have to do a repair where the rot is developed there on this bottom rail, and then put the window all back together. So if you want to take a closer look here, you can see where some dry rot had developed over time. So we're going to replace this lower rail on this sash. Okay. These are some of the typical tools that you'll be needing. There's some different style putty knives here. This combination knife works really well. We can use it as a scraper. The tip works really good for going along the edges. A 2-inch rigid putty knife is always handy to have. A glazing tool for installing points and working and tooling the glazing compound. And then an 1.5 inch wide rigid putty knife is always good to have as well. This is a scraper with a different style tip. I've modified this one for getting in certain angles. Here's another one that has a beveled edge with the eased edge. This works really good for scraping or removing paint. This is a larger scraper for scraping down surface areas. This is a carbide tip scraper with a hose attachment, which works really well. A wire brush is always handy to have. This is a specialized tool that you can use if you need to remove a window and it's been painted shut. It has a flexible steel edge that's serrated so you can go along the edge of the window and break the paint line. And then you've got your glazing compound. This is a aqua glaze. It's a water base. It works really well. Your glazing points. And then this is a traditional oil-based product that works also, but it takes longer to dry and you have to primer it with oil-based primer. Use a respirator that has a carbon fiber type filter, our carbon filter, and you want to make sure you set up a work area that's well lit, a stable work platform, and a drop cloth so you can catch any of the debris and everything. Also, heat gun works really well. That way you can heat up the edge along of the glass and the sash to soften the putty to help remove the putty. Okay, so now that the glass has been removed safely, you want to go along the edge of the bed where the rabbit is and make sure that there's no glazing points still in there. If there are, get those removed. Make sure this is all smooth and there's no putty or paint debris or anything in there. That way, when you go to put the new glass in, you can run the bedding compound and the glass will sit in there smooth. Okay. Okay, so we've did our prep and we're going to remove this bottom rail that is rotten and mill a new piece to replace the damaged part. And then the next thing we're going to do is go over to table saw so we can cut down and remove the other part of rotten stock so we can splice in some fresh, good material. Okay, so now we're going to run this through the table saw. Which will give us enough material to remove so we can splice in a fresh, solid piece of wood.
At this point, we've got the stile at the bottom of the storm repaired on both sides. And we've moved on to fitting and replacing the bottom rail of the storm windows. And we've got it shown here clamped up and glued. And they will soon be ready to be sanded and then dowel pinned for strength. Okay, here you can see where we've drilled and now we're putting in the dowel pins that will add strength to the bottom rail joint where it meets the stile.
This is fine, Gabe. Okay, we're getting ready right now to trim off the dowel pins and the spline so it's all flush. We can sand and finish doing the final prep. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to dry fit the glass and make sure it fits proper from our new repairs that we just did here. So we need a final prep and sanding. And then we're going to do some scraping and sanding on this paint so it's prepped and ready for the finished paint process. All right. Right now I'm taking this scraper and I'm scraping down this face, feathering down the old paint so we can blend it in for our touch-up paint and priming here. Okay, we're going to basically clean off this glass. This is this piece we're able to salvage and dry fit it and get ready to prep it for reglazing it. So we're just kind of cleaning it off right now from it sitting outside. Just rotate it. Here. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to take this razor blade scraper real carefully. We're going to get the paint off, so when we reset the glass, it's going to sit in the bed of the rabbit flush. You just kind of go around the edge and make sure you get all that excess paint and everything off of the glass. Here's the pieces that were on the storm sashes that you saw in the video. And they basically, it's a real simple joint, just a rabbit lap joint. And whoever made them, all they did was put this together with a little glue with screws. They didn't dowel pin them or anything. So over time, that started to deteriorate, and the screw was in there. And once moisture gets in there, you start getting some corrosion around a piece of metal. That just accelerates the deterioration process. I mentioned in the room with the video, this you couldn't really tell until we started peeling the paint off on how extensive the damage was to this rail. It's pretty significant. And then over time, I've seen windows where the rot would happen and the glass is so heavy you get a compression and the glass would just literally start to settle and compress down on a rotted joint like that. So this is the sash that you saw in the video that we actually did the repair on. And something else to note, you want to use a clear fur, tight grain fur, because it's going to have a lot denser quality and properties than typical materials. Also, fur has a natural resin that's semi-rot resistant. So you don't want to use a softwood like pine or hemlock. That wouldn't be a good type of stock to use. So here on the side you can see that joint. The bottom section along with the rail was rotten, so we had to cut off part of the actual stile, which is the vertical member of a window or door. Rails are the horizontal members of a rail or door, and that's on the handout I gave you. So it's just kind of a lap joint detail here, and then we dowel pin the rail into that, and that way we were able to create this new section and repair the damage. The rest of the window's in really good shape actually, other than some painting. And you can see on this side where I was mentioning where you want to kind of sand and feather out the paint if you can. You don't have to necessarily bring it all down to bare wood. So any flaky paint, sand and feather that all out is always really good to do. So one thing I want to do is talk about safety a little bit. You always want to have a pair of safety glasses. You only get 2 pairs, one pair of eyes, so that's always good to do. Some gloves if you're going to be working with any chemicals or anything like that. These are a nitrile type glove. They are better than a latex glove. They hold up a little bit better. A good dust mask if you're just doing some light sanding. But if you have any thought or doubt that you're going to be dealing with any lead paint or anything, it's better to get a respirator that has a carbon filter that's going to take care of any organic compounds versus just the dust and everything. In the video, we did a little short segment on some tools and things. They have these scrapers that have these removable tips, and they have different profiles that you can put on that might match or work better for a particular type of area you're going to scrape. These are real handy. This one I modified on the grinder so we could get in more tighter areas and things like that. So that's another nice thing, you can actually modify them a little bit. This is that one scraper I mentioned. It has a hose attachment. This is real handy if you're going to be working on something that's really dusty and everything. This type of scraper is handy too because it's small, easy to use. And this is just that larger type of scraper for big surface areas if you're going to do prep. Wire brush is always handy to have. And then I have two different types of pry bars that I typically use. A little claw bar here, which you saw me using when I took the storm window out. And then this is a combination pry bar nail puller I've always find handy. This is in my nail bag or tool bag or in my pocket constantly. This is one of the tools I use the most. Everybody knows what one of these is, a hammer. Of course, need one of those. And then a good chisel, sharp chisel is always good to have too as well. Here's some products that we've found over time that have worked really well. On the Bigelow House storm window repair, we ended up using a fast set epoxy for doing the adhesion because we felt it's going to hold up better and get a better bond. There's water-based glues that are formulated to be water resistant and waterproof. This is a really good one we use typically on any exterior type of joinery, wood, windows, doors, things like that when we're actually manufacturing a new window or door. This right here is an epoxy filler. It's a two-part filler. The nice thing about this is it stays flexible, so seasonally wood will expand and contract. It'll expand and contract and stay flexible versus older types of putties and spackles get hard and brittle, so they'll actually start to fail over time and loosen up. And then there's an epoxy sealer here. It's a two-part mix. What's nice about it is it'll penetrate down into the wood fiber and catalyze and cure out and literally stop and retard any additional dry rot or damage that's caused by fungus and bacteria and things like that. And then of course you have an oil base or a water based primer you want to use. And then a couple different types of brushes. I like a angle sash brush here. They're easier to work with because you can cut in really easy. Typically a 2-inch brush is real handy. And then for this quick little jobs, you can get these little disposable brushes here, a bristle brush, or these foam brushes work really good as well. In the video, you saw this tool here. This tool is real handy if you have like a double hung window and they're painted shut and you can't get them to open. This has a serrated edge and it's flexible, so you can get in around the edge of the window here and kind of break that paint line and free things up and get the window operating again. So this is a handy tool. They're hard to find, and I'm working on finding a source for these that we can post on our website for references and things like that. Going through the putty knives again. This combination tool is very, very handy. I use one of these constantly when I'm doing any type of prep or paint work. And then a flexible 1.5 or 2-inch putty knife are always good to have. And then I mentioned a rigid putty knife that has a slightly beveled edge. These work really good for scraping and doing a little more aggressive, heavier work. And then you have your glazing tool, which this helps set points and tool the glazing compound as well as this side here. And we'll be working on showing you how to do a window glazing here in just a little bit. This is a epoxy mix that actually comes in it. As you squeeze it, it comes out in equal amounts, and then you can mix this up with a putty knife. You can pick this up versus buying this 2-part type epoxy here. Okay, and then a good utility or razor knife's handy to have. This is something that my dad had found years ago. It's an attachment that you put in your drill that spins this part and this handle, and it's designed that you remove the glazing compound and you go along the edge like this. I just found it, even as skilled as I am, very hard to use. So it's a good idea, but a challenge for the average person to try to use something like this. So the heat gun, being careful to not heat up the glass too much, softens the putty up enough that you can tool it out with a putty knife and get that out and pull the points and carefully pull the glass out. Okay, so moving over to some other things here. Storm windows are a good thing to have on a house. Typically, when you have an older home like this, they do three things I find. They give you a little preservation, so they're actually protecting the original window, keeping the elements out more on the storm window, which you can see this would be the original window on the house if those storm windows weren't on there. They give you some noise abatement, which helps with sound, things like that. And they also give you some R value and insulating value as far as energy goes. And another thing you can do, which they actually did on the Bigelow house, there's a low E film that you can put on that helps with the sun bleaching out furniture and draperies and artwork and things like that and rugs, but it also helps with energy transfer as well. This is a mock-up of a typical storm window that we build, and behind me here I found this and salvaged this little double hung window that we did the application with the storm window. But our storm windows, we put a weather seal around the edges that help make it a little more airtight. The windows on the Bigelow house, and typically storm windows you see, are just fit in. They don't have any weather seal on them. This double hung window as well, we've retrofitted insulated glass in the lower sash. So I use this as a model showing that we can actually put insulated glass in an original wood window if it's 1 3/8 or thicker. And I left the upper one with the single pane glass to show you can see the difference. But once you do that, if you do choose to change out the glass, the weight of the glass is heavier than original single pane glass. So you have to address the counterbalance. So there's two ways you can go. You can retrofit a block and tackle type of balancer, which is the spring is measured, the weight of the strength of the spring is measured to calculate the weight of the glass. And then you basically do a rabbet detail on the side of the sash, and this is concealed in the side of the sash, and it goes right up against the jamb, and you don't even see it, and it counterbalances the window. The window over here behind this gentleman, actually, I can show you in a little while, shows that type of application. That's a modern style window with the traditional look that we did. Another option is this spring-loaded retrofit. So this would replace the old sash pulley type, and it is like a tape measure, and the springs are very strong. So this then would become a counterbalance weight here. If you have a casement style window, some houses had casement that swing open like a door, and they had the hinges on the outside. Well, if you go to do a storm window on that, it's hard because the hinges are proud of the sash and you can't fit the storm window. So what we do is we retrofit this style of concealed casement hinge on the top and bottom in place of the old butt type hinges that you see. And then we have some different types of weather seals that we can do on the windows themselves. The seal the outside edge between the two windows where the check rail and the top and bottom, so therefore helping eliminate drafts. That's typically where most of your energy is going, is from drafts and air leakage in your house. So if you were to go around just with some caulking and paint, seal any gaps or cracks around your doors, do weather sealing around your doors and windows. This is a nice weather seal we make that goes on a door jamb, which then would seal up against the door when it opens and closes, seal the threshold to the door, things like that. So eliminating air gaps and drafts is key for energy efficiency. A lot of our joinery, we do traditional mortise and tenon type joinery, so we have these samples here that show that. And then another style in our storm window is a simple cope and stick. So this would be called a cope, and then that just goes right into that joint like that. And then we do a dowel pin, which makes that even a stronger joint. Simple joinery, but it's stronger than like a typical miter or what was done on the original Bigelow house. Excuse me, these aren't original. These are storm windows that were made later down the road, but they only have a screw and glue, so they're not very strong over time. Nice thing about these storm windows, I also found this nice hardware, this elbow, so the windows actually will kick out, so you don't have to take them off in the summertime, and you can put your screens in and get some ventilation, and then you can close them and they seal up. So a lot of my clients have an area that they, in their bedrooms or a living dining area, they'll have us put this type of a storm hardware on there so they don't have to take the storm windows off in the summertime. Okay, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask or comment on? Sure.
Going back a little ways, when you're when you're scraping things down and you're getting all the loose material off and everything, and you're getting ready to start priming and prepping and getting ready for glazing, how dry does the wood have to be if it's really wet? And how do you tell if it's dry enough?
Well, if you had a moisture meter, would be the best way to tell, and 10% or under, and typically the relative humidity and the moisture content in wood in our climate and region averages 10 to 12%. So, because things are going to expand and contract. So if it's an average of 10% moisture content, you're going to be pretty safe. Yeah. And you can kind of almost touch, like this is dried out now, but if it was saturated, you could almost touch it and tell that it was damp or wet. And probably an inexpensive moisture meter might cost you like $25, $30 for one that isn't very accurate, up to $75 plus for a decent type of a moisture meter. Any other questions? Yes?
How much would it cost to put the low film on windows? Like maybe a smaller, little more modest size house?
There's a couple different types of low-E film out that I've been researching on, and there's a company in Seattle that they will sell you the product or they will come and do the installation of the product. I'm trying to find a more economical source on it that will perform. So there's all kinds of different grades. So I did a little research with Craig for the Bigelow House, and it was averaging about $5 to $7 a square foot for the film, typically. So I'm thinking that's pretty expensive, so I'm trying to find a source that's more economical for the typical homeowner. But it's a good thing to actually add to the window system.
And what is the life expectancy of that home?
Probably 15 to 20 years or more, depending on its exposure. So I think if you were to make the investment, buy a higher grade so it's going to last longer. We found on this film that was on the storm windows, it had either the application wasn't done very well or it had shrank up and wrinkled over time. And it was a challenge to get it off the piece of glass that we salvaged and everything. So, okay. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, if you're staying with the pulley system and the ropes, I'm doing some replacement right now.
Sure.
Is it better to, I think the original ropes were cotton. Is it better to stay with cotton or go to nylon, do you think? Or?
Well, there's a couple different types of sash rope that I've found. The newer type actually has a nylon cotton weave, so there's like a nylon center cord so they don't stretch out as much. And don't buy like a clothesline type of cord. Sash cord is specifically designed for the sash weight so it doesn't stretch out and everything.
Where would you find them?
If you're local here in Olympia, Olympia Supply actually carries sash cord, or you can search online and check a couple different sources there. And one of our goals over the next few months is to update our website for all these references so the do-it-yourself or a homeowner can source these things or contact us for references and referrals too. So
there are different sizes.
Yeah.
Also.
Following up on that pulley system now, that in the old houses typically that's an open space with a lot of heat loss. Now,
Exactly.
if you're restoring it like he's doing with the cords, is there any way to insulate it? And if you replace some of those things you saw showed with the counterweights, can you fill that space and get better insulation with that system?
What we've done is, in that case, is if you do retain the original sash cords and pulleys and weights, if you can carefully take the trim off from the inside, you can friction fit a piece of rigid insulation in there that's about an inch thick. It doesn't interfere with the sash weights and everything, and you can spray foam and set that in there. That creates an air infiltration dampener, also gives you some R value. So that's what I've found typically the best way to go. Because even on houses where someone's not knowingly replaced their windows with a replacement window or a vinyl window, typically the installation was done poorly. Within 5 or so years, that slip-in vinyl window, the caulking around the edges has failed. They're leaking as bad, if not worse, than the original wood windows. And the life expectancy of a vinyl type window is 15 to 20 years maybe, depending on its exposure. And then some of the wood replacement windows are made with like a fast-growing pine, which is going to dry rot out in about 15 to 20 years in our climate too. So it's sad that people are putting investment in these new replacement windows and they typically don't perform or hold up over time, versus spending that same amount of time or amount of money, if not less money, restoring
and weatherizing your original wood windows, which have already been in the home 50 to 100 years, other than, you know, the bottom rail showing a little sign of deterioration from neglect or lack of maintenance, the window system's actually in really good shape, and it performs really well. So that's what I advocate to most people, and try not to get on my soapbox and, you know, bash the vinyl industry and everything. So my goal is just to be a hands-on resource for the local community, to educate them on their viable options for the wood window preservation and maintenance. So, any other questions? Yes?
I have a question about lead paint, because we know that our windows in our home have lead paint, and some have been unstuck by previous owners, but not really stripped properly, so there's like flakes, and others are still painted, and we're not really sure how to do this in a safe way.
That's a good question. The EPA, as of April of this year, passed some code and law that contractors, painting contractors, restorers have to take a course. It's a health and safety measure, which I think is a good thing. And what's happening typically, like in your home, is the friction of that double hung window going up and down is causing that dust, and then this air that's flowing in, and that's literally, if you had a test, then you're probably going to get readings of lead paint on your floors and other areas. So it's good to be conscientious about that. If you can really carefully plastic off an area to help do the containment and mediation, you can then carefully remove the windows and sand them down. And at that point in time, you might as well do the weather stripping that I've been mentioning, because you already have the windows out. So if you just take your time and be really careful, you can avoid some health hazards over time. So I'm in the process of researching that. My business and part of my crew, we're going to be taking the lead paint certification ourselves. So we will have that resource. And I know a number of other companies in our community that are going through the same measures as well. So just being conscientious of that, and keeping things contained, and having a really good HEPA type vacuum if you're going to do the cleanup, and actually keep things damp. Keeping the dust down helps as well. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, what I wanted to work on here is showing everybody how to glaze a window today. And what I typically like to do is wet set the glass in a bed of acrylic caulk, and this particular type of caulking has a formulation with elastomeric, so it stays flexible and pliable. So if we want to take a brief break, because I have to get the glass out of the truck and I'll get things kind of set up here, people can maybe help themselves to some refreshments or something, and then I'll get everything all set up and I'll show you how to glaze a window. First thing I want to do is I ordered this glass because we had our challenges with saving the glass, and we broke a number of pieces. So I want to just dry fit the glass. So the last thing you want to do is have all the caulking bed in there, and you go to set the piece of glass in there, it doesn't fit. So and when they cut the glass, they don't ease the edges or anything, so it's sharp. I've already nicked my finger once here, so I should have a pair of gloves on. Whoa. Used to working in my shop with a lot of headroom. Okay. And what I like to do is let it kind of cantilever over the edge of your bench or table. Okay, so that fits just fine. So we're safe there. So carefully take that out. Again, try not to drag your hand on the edge. You'll slice your finger. I'm just going to set this here out of the way for now. Kind of like that. Okay, I like to have a damp wet rag handy because this is a water-based product, so you can kind of keep things clean. And you want to run a bead of sealant around the edge of the bed or the rabbet, enough to where it oozes out, it eases out a little bit on the exterior side, or the interior side, excuse me, of the sash. And then you can take, after it cures 24 to 40 hours, you can take a razor knife and just cut that off and peel it off, because this will be like rubber, like a rubber band when after it cures. So just pump up your caulking gun, get pressure. And then what I like to do is use the edge of the rabbet as a guide and let it just kind of rub right along the edge there, so you keep a nice uniform bead, about 1/8 of an inch bead. Make sure you don't have any little voids, so it creates a solid continuous bead all the way around. Careful when you get to the corners, you don't put a little too much, because you're basically would just be wasting material, because you're kind of overlapping when you get to each corner. And if you're right or left-handed, just get in a position where you're most comfortable. I'm kind of ambidextrous, so I can work with both hands, but I do favor my right hand. Like that. And then one more here on the top. Okay. Just kind of look and make sure you got an even bead, no voids. Okay, that all looks good. Again, being very careful. This is the tricky part here. Just kind of let it lay down in there like that. And then you want to just put a little pressure around the edge to get that compression, because the bead of sealant is 1/8 of an inch thick. This way it sets down in there nice and flat. And typically we would do this and let this cure for 24 to 48 hours, but since we're doing our workshop, we're just going to go ahead and do the motions and do it all here and show you how to do the glazing part as well.
Still use glazing points then?
Yes, that's going to help. But my problem, I was noticing, they might have got left on the workbench, so we'll see what we can do about that here. All right. I prefer this Aqua Glaze product. It's water-based. It's a little more user-friendly. It tools really nice as far as easy to work with a putty knife. It dries within 24 to 48 hours versus a typical oil-based glazing compound will take up to a week to dry.
Can you find it locally?
I had to order this, and there's a resource called Old Window Restorers online. Great fella. He's got a lot of little how-to videos. He's back east. He's very compassionate about window restoration and preservation. So, really good resource. So if you buy this product, it'll get some separation because it's a water-based product, or even oil-based products do the same thing. They'll have a separation. You want to take and mix that all back up, knead it like you would dough and everything. So go ahead and get some out. Again, I'm wearing some gloves here. And then one of the things that I like to do is when you're running the glazing compound around, you got to think about your sight line. So I like to hold it about a 1/16 of an inch back from the edge of where you would see the rabbet. So then when you cut in with your paint then flows over that edge onto the glass. So when you're inside looking out, you don't see that paint actually coming back out into the edge of the glass. So when you're tooling and putting your glazing putty around, it's good to kind of keep it a 1/16 of an inch away from when you would look through and see the edge of the glass.
So you're not going to use points?
Well, I don't have any, unfortunately. So I'm just going to, what's that?
They're on the way.
Derek went to get them? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to tool the putty. We're going to kind of just work with it so you can get some ideas, some techniques. So what I do is I have some in my hand like this, and then you basically just take your putty knife, and you kind of just work it along the edge here. Some people like to roll it up like a little snake or worm. Just kind of work it around the bed. And a really ideal way to do this, on that old window restorers video, he has like an easel that he has set up that's tilted a little bit, that he can rotate the sash. So he's actually standing here like this and working like this. Does that section, flips it around, does another section. Again, he's doing a more square, smaller window. So if that would work, but then you have to set up that or some type of workbench. So typically you'd be doing on a flat surface like this. Or in a lot of cases on the house where you didn't actually take the window out and everything. So just work all the way along the edge, and I'm putting enough pressure as I'm putting this along the edge of the rabbet that I'm getting some compression, so it's seating down in there really good. And then typically I have a little vessel of some water or something, because I found with a little bit of moisture on here it helps. And you just tool that. Probably maybe a 7-degree angle. You kind of just follow that along the edge just like that. And again, if you can, or I suggest taking and leaving it a 1/16 of an inch back from the edge. And you just carefully come along this edge.
Glazing product, once you open the can, do you have to use it all, or?
It's got a pretty good shelf life. Yeah. And what I try to do is make sure it's all kind of pushed down in there where I just took some out. Because if it gets up around the edges, even though you put the lid back on, it might dry out. And then you get those chunks in there, and then that just causes you all kind of grief if you get a little hard chunk or something in there. So I make sure it's all kind of pushed down and then put the lid back on. So when I took the tool and went along this edge like this, there's just a slight little clean line between the glass and the excess putty, so you can take your putty knife and then come back like this real careful and just pull that away without touching your nice new bed that you put on there. I would probably switch to a wider putty knife at this point here. So by taking and letting that dry, the caulking, you would be able to look through the glass and see that edge. Right now, because it's oozed out, I had to kind of guess where that sight line would be, where the edge of the wood. So we should be fine though. And if any of you have ever tried to glaze a window before yourselves and you've used the old oil base, you saw how easy that was to work. This stuff tools and works so much nicer. So I'm really glad that I found this source. So one of my goals is over time potentially start sourcing these things, maybe buy it in bulk so I keep my costs down, and then sell it back to local homeowners in the area. Have just a local resource, become like a distributor dealer for some of these products. Like the weather seal, we buy it in 250-foot rolls, you know, which is expensive for someone to buy that much material, but because we use it so much, but then we can sell some of that to a homeowner and buy this stuff by the case, things like that. So are there any questions about glazing anybody might have? No? Made it look too easy? Is that what it was? I'm just wondering, I don't think it'd be real efficient or effective for everybody to try a hand at it, but anybody that would like to try to work with this, they're welcome to come up, and I've got an extra pair of gloves and they could try it out if they'd like. Any volunteers? Okay.
Oh, no, I have a question.
Sure, you can be on camera with me.
You don't prep the wood or anything? I read that You should put like some linseed oil in there or something to prep the wood. Is that?
Because I actually ran that sealant in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's, yeah. But yeah, you're right. You might want to take an oil or primer that, but I found it gets some better adhesion, and the putty itself will bond it into wood a little bit. Yeah.
So the sealant is good enough for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question though, is if the wood is really dry and brittle, putting some oil in there, because you'd be using that oil-based product, glazing putty typically is probably what would work best. But you could actually even do some priming around that edge instead of the raw wood would be a good idea as well. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Hopefully you learned something and some ideas of tools and techniques and product. I do have some interesting articles. Anybody that wants to reference something that's recent is the May issue of Fine Home Building has a great article about replacement versus repair. And then there's another magazine publication, American Bungalow, that came out a few years ago, has a great article about the history and evolution of glass, double hung windows, their form and function for a reference. And then 2 other fine home building publications and articles that came out over the last few years that show the actual techniques of weather sealing and repairing windows. So I can give you the names and dates of those different articles if you'd like as well. Okay, thank you very much.